Hi guys, and welcome back to today's episode. In today's episode, I'm going to take you through the process of how to build a habitat for the little penguin, which is one of the newest animals that came with the Oceania pack. For these little animals, we are going to build this outside habitat with an underwater viewing area for the guests and a very detailed backstage area, including the normal backstage housing for the penguin group, a little isolation area in case one of the animals needs to be isolated. And then we also have a little quarantine area for when one of the animals is sick, so we don't spread any diseases. So let's get started. So just before we start to talk about the little penguin and their habitat, I wanted to talk with you because some of you might have missed the last episode or were like asking themselves where the episode is, because I normally upload 2 times a week on Monday and on Thursdays. But last Monday I simply was not able to finish this episode. I had the outside area and the base of the backstage area, but I wasn't able to finish the interior of the backstage and decorating it, and then finally making a facade and a roof onto the building, and also the guest viewing area was not existing. So I just wasn't able to put out a episode for you guys on Monday. But I am thinking about, or I was already thinking about it for some time, to slow it down a little bit and do only 1 episode per week. So that's what I will probably do for now. So I will be uploading on Thursdays. I'm just gonna stick with the Thursday since this is the day that this episode is coming out, and also the last episode was coming out. So I'm just gonna stick with Thursdays for now, and I will see how that goes, or if I'm able to go back to posting 2 times a week, or if I'm just staying flexible and honestly just doing it depending on how fast I am. Like in some weeks we will have 1 video, or in some weeks we will have 2 videos, but I'm just gonna see how it works. But probably for now we will stick with 1 episode per week. Now coming to what we are building in this episode, we are building, as I said, a habitat for the little penguin. And this is an animal from the Oceania pack. And if you might don't know, we are building this habitat in the Tiki Town section, which is a Oceania and Australia section of our newest city zoo called the Lochensee Zoo. And for this habitat, I had the plan to make it a round habitat. It's not like 100% round now because of the backstage area, or the building that is the backstage area. So it's just like the front part, which is like the actual habitat. It's that is around, and it will be pretty much the first habitat you will see when you enter the Tiki Town section. But you will see more of that, or how the whole section is coming together once we finish this whole section. We are not only building for the Oceania pack animals, but we will also be building for some of the older animals that, as I said, are all like Oceania and Australia animals. And for this habitat, I wanted to make it look very natural, like just like a coastal area that is located in Oceania. I had some inspiration pictures of like the natural biome itself, and I also saw some pictures of habitats from little blue penguins, and I really liked the vibe or the look of the habitat from the little penguins in the Bronx Zoo. It looked relatively small, and also the like pool area wasn't that deep as far as I could tell from the pictures that I saw. But simply going from the vibe and the look of the foliage, I really liked it, and I kind of wanted to recreate it a little bit. So this habitat is inspired from the habitat in the Bronx Zoo. So I went for like this full beach look, which is like a just complete sand, and then these sandy colored rocks, and then we will have just a little bit of foliage and a little bit of rocks that you would see on like the coast. And for this habitat, I intentionally used the faux rocks because I wanted to have them look like they are faux rocks and not like natural rocks, because that is just something that I see a lot in zoos, that they really, especially in these like habitats that have a big swimming areas or generally are just moist a lot, like for penguins and seals and stuff like that. So I wanted to do that too. As you might know, I'm going for a heavy realism in my zoos and in my habitats. So I'm really glad that we have these rocks, and I just really love the look of it. And I honestly also really liked the default color on them for this habitat, so I didn't change the color of them. You can of course change the color of them, for example, to like a grayish rock or just another sandy or brownish color, but it just fit very well. And I also made this big like water area and bathing pool for the penguins that is also relatively deep, so they have a lot of space to dive, and so it looks really interesting for the guests that are in this underwater viewing area that we will build in the very end of this episode. And also the habitat, or not really the habitat, but the underwater area is lined with concrete that I recolored a little bit so it would fit more into the theme, because it is just so much more practical to have a concrete or like any solid material lined bathing area. I know that like a natural area or like natural foliage and stuff like that looks more beautiful normally, but as I said, I'm going for heavy realism, and also as I read in the best practice guidelines, it is advised to have the pool lined with concrete so that it is just very easy to clean. So occasionally the pools would get drained completely and then cleaned out by the staff. So it is way easier to do so when the pool is like out of some sort of solid material instead of like a natural ground and soil and then plants and stuff like that, especially for the size. So that is the reason that I went with the concrete floor, although it might not look the prettiest, but it is definitely really realistic and pretty in a way, for a realistic way. And just in case if you're wondering why I have this little armadillo statue in my habitat and moving it around, I already used the armadillo statue in the Tasmanian Devil episode, or while building their habitat, and the kiwi statue while building the kiwi habitat. The reason is that I use these statues or anything that is similar to the size of the animal I'm going to put in. And honestly, the armadillo statue is still too big for the little penguin, but I couldn't find any item that was as big as a little penguin. So yeah, I use the armadillo statue still, and that is just to have like a visual helping for me to see how big the animal is and to see it in comparison to the things that I'm building. Because I sometimes find myself doing things like too big or too small for the animals, because I just don't have the perspective on how big the animals actually are. So I am using one of the statues to just have something similar to the size to use for them, so that I can see the sizing of them, and so I don't do things too big or too small. I could technically just put down the animals into the habitat, but I found it a little less practical than using these statues, because I sometimes like remove the barrier or remove the gate, the habitat gate, and then the animals get all boxed up, and then I need to get them unboxed every time. And just to save that, I'm just using the statues. So that is also a little tip from my side. If you don't want to put the animals inside the habitat before you build or while you build, you can use any item and compare it to the animal and see how big it is. I have like a mini habitat like somewhere in the background hidden, where I place down the animal that I'm going to build for, and then there I'm going to see how big it actually is, what statue I can use for reference, or like having some wall pieces put down to see how big the gap needs to be for them to move through like a little hole in the wall, so that I know right away how big to make these things. So as I said earlier, I am going for heavy realism in my zoos rather than just the looks and the requirements that the Zoopedia gives us. So I'm reading best practice guidelines and doing some research before I start to build my habitats, and I of course want to share with you this knowledge and to explain why I'm doing things the way I do in this habitat. So let's get started. The minimum requirements for like penguins in general, or the little penguin, is that they are kept with a minimum of 6 birds in one habitat. But you could always go for, of course, bigger, because they naturally also live in these big groups. It is required to have for them a land space, a pool, a isolating area, a quarantine area that have separate water and air systems, and of course the normal backstage housing, or like the indoor area for the penguins. The sizing is like, there's no real like requirement, or like what you could say like for one penguin you need at least this and that space. They rather just said that for 12 penguins, the area for all the parts that are included in the penguin habitat, including the indoor areas, are enough to be on a like space of 300 square meters. In the outside area, it is required for them to have enough shading and sunlight. So what I did is I used some bigger palms, or these silver ferns they are called, for natural shading, and then I looked depending on the daytime how the shading moves throughout the habitat, and I figured that the 2 silver ferns are enough shading for the whole habitat, and so they give shade during the like afternoon, and in the morning the building itself throws the shade into the habitat, so they have enough shading and also sunlight in the habitat. They also should have some sort of weather protections by trees, shrubs and rocks. So we have like different shrubs and rocks around, and we also have the little nesting boxes that you saw me placing down. It is also required to have these nesting boxes for the penguins so that they can retreat into them, build their little nests, and of course lay their eggs in there, and also just use them for protection from weather like heavy wind and rain, or just to retreat from other animals. And for these nesting boxes, it is required to have the entry with like a pipe, as I did, that is pointing slightly downwards to prevent rainwater to flow into the nesting box and making it all wet on the inside. And I also made sure that the nesting box has a lid on top so that the staff has an easy entry into the nesting box and see what is going on inside of this box. And the different boxes should be placed at least 2 meters apart, because the female penguins can get a little territorial around their nest. Or their nesting box. They are generally not territorial animals, but just for the nesting boxes they should be placed a little bit further apart, so there are no like fights between the penguins. And the outside habitat should be out of fine sand so that the penguins can dig around in it and also make themselves little like holes or like like burrows. We also have these habitat burrows in game that the little penguins can use, but I personally didn't want to use it because they have like this whole big room under the earth, and that wasn't really like realistic in my eye for the penguins, at least. Of course they would do like little burrows, but they wouldn't like build like a whole like as they look in the in-game, the habitat burrows, it just wasn't super realistic in my eyes, so I didn't use them. But technically the little penguins would do that in the wild and also in the zoo. And for the temperature, there is not really a requirement, but extremes should be avoided. So extreme heat and extreme cold should be avoided. So I have like, of course, some ventilation and cooling system in the inside. So when it is too hot in the summer, for the penguins, they can retreat inside where it is cooler. I don't really think that it can get too hot for the penguins in the temperate biome that we are in, but we are still providing it with them in case we are having like a heat wave where the zoo is located, so that the penguins can still be cooled. And of course, when it gets too cold in the winter time, the penguins can be enclosed in the inside area for a certain amount of time. They can tolerate relatively cool temperatures, and it also rarely gets below to freezing temperatures in the biome that we are in. So they should be fine for the most part of the year, but they can still be on the inside, and there we also provided them with heating lamps so they can heat themselves up whenever they like. So as you have seen in this episode, I actually included a little more about how I decorated the backstage area, and also you'll later see me build the roof and the windows. And the reason is simply because if I haven't included this in this episode, it would have been like really short, because the outside habitat for the penguins is simply not like really complex when it comes to the foliage and everything like that. So I decided to show you more about the things I do normally off camera, like decorating and building the roof. So it might help some people out there, because as I said, I normally don't show that just because I personally think that it is not too interesting, and especially for the decorating in the backstage area, I use a lot of like pre-made things that I did myself. So I figured it might help someone, and then this episode wouldn't be too short. So yeah, that's what I did. And for the backstage area, we didn't have like a lot of space, but I thought it was just about enough to have like a mini kitchen and the fridge in there. And also in the quarantine area that you see right here, we have a separate mini kitchen or sink, and also the other things like a broom and stuff like that we have in there separately, because it is a quarantine area, so you don't want to mix up your like tools or anything like that between those areas. I worked in a little like reptile zoo for a short time, and there they also had this quarantine area, and they had also the different supplies in different colors, so you could really tell which of the items were for the normal section and which ones were for the quarantine section, so you don't accidentally mix up some stuff and potentially spread some sort of disease or anything. So that's what I also did. I recolored the things compared to the ones that are hanging in the normal section. So that is just a teeny tiny detail that you could also do if you are building your own little quarantine area. And then I, of course, as you can see here, built some kind of support for the roof. And here I also decided to use the painted wood to make everything like cohesive in there. I still want to make the backstage area look a little more pretty. So we have everything in this bluish color because the little penguins are blue, so it just was fitting. And I also use the support beams for the roof to attach the lights, and then I also built a little wooden fixture to hang the heat lamps on. And in a second we will start building the guest viewing area. So when it comes to the visibility of the little penguins, I of course decided to have a underwater viewing, because it's just so interesting to see any aquatic or semi-aquatic animal swim. And so I of course included that, but I of course wanted to have the opportunity for the guests to also see the little penguins on land. So I have some smaller little windows on the sides that are like located in a way that the guests can also see the animals on land, but not in a way that the animals are not disturbed by the guests. So I kept the like glass area for the like dry part of the habitat relatively small. And for the guest viewing area in the underwater view, I decided to make this like half circle almost. And I really like the idea of having it laid out also with the faux rock. So it feels like very immersive for the guests, almost as they were like stepping down into a cave, or even themselves like underwater, even though they are not underwater, and be like surrounded by the rocks that are also inside the habitat. So I laid out the floor with the faux rocks, and then built the little stairs also in a half circle. I used the mud pillar technique to build these and deleted half of the circle, so I only have one half of it. And I put some other rocks on the sides, and also these like little like curves. I don't know what they are called exactly, so that you could also have a little glimpse to this area, and also to the glass panels that show the underwater area for the penguins. Already like from the sides. I honestly really like the idea, and then I decided to add this planter into the middle of the stairs, because the stairs were just relatively big, and it would of course add a little bit more like natural foliage to there, and a natural shading. So I really like the result of this little planter. I also did it at a slight angle, so that it follows more the direction of the stairs, which is obviously downwards. And then I just filled up the little gaps that we have in between the path and the like rocks and stuff like that with just a little bit of grass. And then I also included some kind of railway so that people could actually grab onto something when they go down the stairs, because some people, especially maybe like elder people, just need a little bit of support when they go down the stairs, and having like no railway at all would be like a little weird, I believe. So I just added these with the rope. It just really adds to the theme and to the vibe that we are going for, and I really love the result, if I'm honest with you. And then I also included some little seating areas on the side so that people can sit down and relax a little bit next to the little penguins. And we are almost at the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that you could learn a lot from me about how to keep the little penguin in zoos. Don't forget to like and leave a comment if you enjoyed this video, and go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so you don't miss any videos that are coming up, and also the next video where we are going to build for the last missing animal from the Oceania pack, which is going to be the quokka. Have fun with the cinematics at the very end, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Until then, bye guys!